Hi, Tim.
Hi, Emma.
So thanks very much for jumping on a call with me today. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Tim. I'm a senior consultant here at Opencast. I've been here for about 2 years. I've been in the software industry for getting on a decade now. And originally I did a degree in geology. I've got a few other things about me. So I'm partially deaf. I'm currently on the waiting list to hopefully see if they can do an operation to give me back some more hearing. Which would be cool. And why I'm here today is I'm non-binary, and we're going to have a talk about non-binary people in tech, gender fluidity, that sort of stuff, as part of Opencast Pride.
Amazing, thank you. I didn't know that you did geology as a degree, so that's an interesting one. How do you get from geology to technology?
When I dropped out of my PhD, I sort of scratching around doing a bit of admin work to be like, right, what am I going to do as my career? And then I got a call from a recruiter, I think, who's basically like, yeah, I've seen your CV, and we've got this software company over in Durham, where I lived at the time, and they're really interested. They want to have a talk because, in short, it's much easier to train a geologist with the right logical mindset to program than it is the other way around. So that's basically how I got in. I said yes, had the conversation. They're like, yeah, you can do object-oriented programming and learn Java on the job, and then we'll get the benefits of you knowing all the science and just picking up the code as you go.
Amazing, excellent. So you mentioned obviously that you identify as being non-binary. For anybody that's kind of confused about that, can you explain what that means?
To me, that means I'm neither male nor female. Like I don't strongly identify with either of those two gender binaries, and I would use they them pronouns.
And so how does being non-binary affect your life on a day-to-day basis? Does it affect your life on a day-to-day basis, or?
For me personally, like being non-binary has made me much more comfortable in my own skin. I feel a lot happier as a person from having come out and realised that's who I was. In terms of day-to-day life, I mean, most people assume that I'm a cis man, so some things are just like, well, I can't be bothered having this conversation with a random person in the shop. Like, it's just not important enough to me. But those areas that are super important to me, like work, sport, and home, then yeah, use the correct terminology, and it's really supportive and nice.
Cool. Excellent. So how do you find that kind of when you're starting to work with people and you, how do you find it to kind of raise that and be able to explain what your pronouns are?
Tricky. I've done it a couple of times. Having to come out and explain what they are it's both useful and energy draining. It's like for me it'd be much better in the long run to have everyone acknowledge you for who I am, but at the same time there's a sort of up for an effort cost of if you're joining a new place or a new client, like, oh no, I have to have these conversations again. And it's judging, for me, it's a judgment of how much will it impact my life versus how much effort do I want to put in right now.
And is there anything that employers can do to make that better? Is there anything where somebody's done something and that's made it a lot easier for you to be able to have those conversations?
Yeah, so when I joined one of my old companies, that they put out a message in advance, so like they knew when I was interviewing, they're like, so they did some education for the management, so they taught themselves, and then they just put out a message in advance, like quietly, like, hey, Tim's joining, this is the situation. And then you look at Opencast and we have these sorts of talks. We've got lots of pride stuff going on, and people are much more aware of gender identities, and a lot of people have their pronouns, whatever they are, like whether they're cis pronouns, trans pronouns, gender fluid pronouns, whatever, in their bios and on their signatures, which makes it a lot easier to be like, oh, well, if it's normalized for me, then it's great. Just be like, yep, there we go.
So obviously you work in technology, and there's a lot of myths around about kind of technologies for men, and it's just men that code and that type of thing. And then you hear counter arguments with people saying, oh, but there's a lot of women that work in technology. You very rarely hear kind of non-binary identities being discussed. So kind of what's your take on kind of those type of conversations? And
I think it's important that we have those conversations. Like, tech is still viewed predominantly as a male-dominated thing, and if you were to look at most tech companies' sort of gender splits, it would probably reinforce that. So I think the messaging around, hey, women can do this as well. Like, I think it's super important that we make sure that that's going. But if we're getting involved in sort of like schemes like Code First Girls or something like that, we're also looking at schemes that support gender non-conforming people and have that in their name. And I guess also part of it is a reflection of society. Like, people are more able to have discussions about binary genders and all of that than they really do about non-binary genders. Thankfully, there are some great people sort of coming out in the celebrity sphere that are causing those conversations to happen, and hopefully that we have these conversations to propagate them down into the tech space and say, hey, look, non-binary people can code as well. Anyone can code, really. Like, tech is for everyone. Don't have those preconceived views going in.
yeah, I always think it's interesting that your kind of gender identity is potentially linked to your coding skills. I'm not quite sure how anybody thinks that might be the case.
But it still isn't. It's why, to me, it's important to focus on it from all aspects. If the battle we're fighting right now is let's get equal pay for everyone and prove to everyone that women can code just effectively, for me personally, that opens up that conversation easier to then have, hey, gender non-conforming people, whatever you think they look like, they are also involved in this conversation. Things like feminism raise everyone up. If we get equality across the board, or get equality for one people, then it makes it easier to do across the board.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So how do you find it kind of having these conversations and raising awareness about non-binary identities? Is this something that you're really passionate about it, but are there kind of days where you're just like, look, I just want to be me and I don't want to be kind of like the representative of all the non-binary people out there, because I'm not?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, I mean, I'm not representative of all non-binary people out there. I think, what was it? A phrase that seemed like non-binary people don't owe you androgyny. I think it's a really common phrase I see out there. And in terms of being, some days I'm just like, I don't have the energy for this. I just kind of, someone else said about it. But at the moment, like, I'm feeling in a great place mentally, and I feel really supportive and sort of able to then go forward. And I had some people tell me some stuff in private, like they wouldn't have been able to have conversations and talks that they did without having seen me tell my story elsewhere. And it's those sorts of, hearing that makes me go, yeah, it was worth it. It's worth putting myself on the line to then enable other people.
Fantastic. So we talked a little bit about work. Obviously you work in kind of a lot of kind of disciplinary teams with lots of different people. You'll be, because we're a consultancy, you'll obviously be working with Opencast people, but you'll also be working with people on client side. How have you found it kind of like in teams? Is there anything that people in teams can do to make it more of an inclusive space?
I think the easy ones that I've always found is don't start your meeting with "Hi guys." Like it's a really simple one, but it's thinking about the language you're using. I don't harp on about it as much as I did, and maybe I should harp on about it more. But I think thinking about language and making sure that you're being inclusive is like, hey everyone, having that time to talk as a team and just discuss what you did at the weekend, whatever, and just make it feel like that one place where you can just be yourselves in it.
Excellent. And what about teams outside work? I know we had a chat before we kind of jumped on the call. You mentioned that you do roller derby, so I'd love to kind of hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I've been really happy to find two extremely supportive teams, and then a lot of roller derby is very an inclusive sport for lots of people. You've got sort of two sides of it. Like they're currently men's roller derby and women's roller derby, but men's is open to anyone, and women's broadly falls into the category of not open to people who identify as men. So the names are currently a bit, I'm like, they could be better, but again, there are better things for me to waste my energy on than fighting about what name these things have. But yeah, everyone's super inclusive. Like, make sure they're using the right pronouns. And people have been like really making sure and apologetic. They're like, no, we want to get it right, and I'm sorry for using the wrong one on track. And then we played a game recently against Wiltshire, and I had a really nice moment when we'd come off track, and someone from the audience introduced me to their child who had just come out as non-binary.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was just like, hey, look, there's this person, there's this role model, like you can do this sort of thing too. You're not going to be alone in that. That just made me really happy to be like, yeah, I can be a role model, and that's really nice. And
Excellent.
it's really
So
nice to go to a sport and be like, yep, doesn't matter what I look like, people are going to treat me how I want to be treated.
yeah. And do you think that's generally heading in the right direction? And do you think there's more of those conversations and more openness?
It's hard. I think at smaller club levels across sports, I think that is the case. As for governing bodies, no. I think there's a lot of regression there. You talk about cycling banning trans women, you talk about segregation in sports, and that's really upsetting because for a long time these arguments were not happening. People were just competing, and now you see them happening. It's kind of like, why are we going backwards? Why are we doing this, and what are the solutions? So I don't have a good idea of what a solution is. I was invited to talk with the Oxford University Press, and I heard some really interesting stuff about what the fencing societies are doing and how they're approaching this sort of thing, and they're kind of moving towards having an open category, as well as being able to trying to support competitions that allow you to go for whatever gender you identify as. And I like the idea of an open category, but I don't think that solves all of the problems, because for me, yeah, perfect, great, open category fits me to a T. But for trans people, they want to compete as their gender, not what they were assigned at birth.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a tricky one. I think there's a lot of conversations, and I think it's back to that. Obviously, there's a kind of traditional approach in terms of, men go in this category, women go in that category, and I think it's something that they don't have an answer for, and they're really trying to grapple with.
Yeah, and it's one of those where you people talk about natural advantage, this, that, the other. Like, if you look at the science, it does not pan out that way. And even if you do take that approach, you're like, cool, well, here's Michael Phelps with his ridiculous lungs and his massive feet and pseudo web toes.
Yep.
That's a natural advantage right there. You know, we didn't kick off about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously Kenyan runners who are kind of like live at altitude and have that kind of like continual altitude training, and then there's no kind of comeback on that. So yeah, I think it's something that there's a lot of talk about fairness and things like that, but as you say, there's a lot of kind of differences between different people. Everybody's different. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm never going to be an amazing runner, but I don't complain about it. I kind of, so yeah, I think you're right. I think it's definitely something that needs to be worked through and needs to be. Do you feel that the voices of the people who are directly affected, do you think they're being listened to while they're trying to kind of work this out?
I think it varies sport by sport. Like, I think you hear it in not in terms of cycling, but in terms, I've heard there are some like all trans male football teams based out of London, and they're in the football hierarchy, and they're allowed to be there. They're supported by the EFL, etc. And then in roller derby, you have these conversations that happen, and yeah, it kind of falls into two distinct categories, but there is an option for people. And if you identify as gender non-conforming or female, sure, WWOOF is open to you. Like, there's literally no questions. It's just like, you are this, fine, welcome. And you've got leading teams in the sports like London Roller Derby putting out T-shirts saying trans people belong in sports, with money being donated to relevant charities. And you're like, yes, let's do this. What, like, if we can have this over here, we can have this in other sports, especially at grassroots level. I think there's been a lot of talk about cricket where they're like, yeah, why is it really hard for women to get into cricket? Because there aren't many female cricket clubs, especially at the low and young level, which means they go into men's, and it's always a safe environment, it's always a supportive environment. No. And they're really grappling with that. They're like, well, we want to increase participation. Like, you need to start the grassroots structure. And it's really hard. Like, you can't just change a culture by snapping your fingers. You got to really work at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember being at school, I'm asking to play football, and they told me I had to play netball. I think I was about 10. I think I told them I was taking them to the International Court of Human Rights, and then they let me play football. But yeah, I think you're right. It's I think there's still a lot of kind of gender bias in terms of which sports are for particular genders, like just in terms of kind of like binary genders, and then obviously that's without kind of non-binary identities being kind of taken into account.
Yeah, I heard Ben Stokes. He said something before the Ashes space. He is something like make sport fun. Sport should be available for everyone. You stop segregating it in school. If someone finds this fun, let them do it. You'll get a better sport from them. I really wanted to play hockey, and we'd never got a chance to play field hockey. And I was like, no, mine. I enjoy football, and I don't mind rugby league, but I'd quite like to play field hockey.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So we've talked obviously quite a lot about non-binary identities and how that affects you, but obviously that's only one little bit of kind of you and your identity, because you're Tim rather than just being non-binary. So what else makes you you?
For being nice. Like, I think I enjoy having fun, both at work and outside of work, and I just try and be nice. Like, treat people how you'd want to be treated, approach with empathy. What makes me in more specific, concrete things, I like climbing. I go bouldering quite regularly. That's been a lovely thing to discover over the last year or so. I've got a stupid small cat next to me. And I do far too much stuff. I do far too many sports, and I'm very tired. But it's all worth it. Yeah, I enjoy work, but I try not to let it dominate my life. I used to be someone who could have work things on their phone and pay attention to stuff on weekends, and I'm like, no. When, as harsh as it sounds, when I'm done for the day, I need to be done for the day. and I need to be able to walk away, unplug, because I know if I do that, when I come back in, you're going to get the best version of me at work. I'm going to produce the best outputs. And like to accidentally plug Opencast, we weren't planning on doing this, but like Opencast really support that by our way of our contracts being outcomes based, not time space. So if I need to leave at 4:30 to go and do something, and then know I'm going to come back, be super refreshed, deliver all my outcomes in a shorter working day, great. Like if I'm beating expectations in a short working day, I know that's just how I work best, to like get those hours compressed and then be able to turn my mind off, go away, do something else fun, do something physical, just be myself in some capacity, and then come back and be able to put on like a work face and be like, right, let's get down to business, let's get this stuff sorted. I definitely feel like I have a different face for work and for home, but I do try and bring parts of home into me, because I wouldn't want to be boring at work. I want to show who I am, but there are certain ways you're expected, like, well, I've got much more of a professional face, approach things in a different way.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks so much, Tim. Thanks for chatting everything through. Thanks for being so open about everything. And hopefully we're going to see some fantastic changes coming through as kind of like governing bodies in sports and employers and teams and people start having these conversations and talking to non-binary people and kind of getting input so that we can make everything as inclusive as possible.
Yeah, I think in workplaces it's definitely getting better. Like, and it's nice to be open. Opencast a really supportive place, and I'm really happy to be in a couple of really supportive like sports and in climbing. It's just like climbing has open categories. It's had it for ages, so I'm just like I wanted to, when we came into this, I was like, I was saying to you, I wanted to paint like a positive picture. I mean, we talk a lot about pride and being anger. Like pride was a protest. I don't want to forget that. We've still got a lot of things to fight for, but at the same time, there's hope, and I want to show happiness as well. We can make this future better for those that come next, but still have a good time ourselves.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Emma.